Everybody, thank you for being here. We're at the top of the hour, so I'll get started. My name's Madeline Acri, and I'm the Energy Storage Manager at Soligent. We also have Jamie on the line. She will be answering any Q&A questions or kind of just managing the chat window. So we are here hosting for you. Today, I wanted to talk about microgrids, and I'm taking kind of more of a macro step back from what I've typically been reviewing in the energy storage series, because I think talking about the grid as a whole, kind of in a more big picture standpoint, can be really helpful because it's easy to kind of get caught up in the minutia of individual systems. But I want to kind of understand how solar and storage are contributing to the grid as a whole. So microgrids are going to be our first session, and then I'm going to kind of shift into virtual power plants and then the US grid in general. So I'm going to be having this kind of high level discussion for the next couple of months. So hope it's interesting to you. We're going to start just by reviewing what is a microgrid. Is this a phrase that you're familiar with? Like, what are your preconceived notions of what a microgrid might mean? We'll talk about the history of them, kind of what the initial microgrids looked like and what they look like now. And in terms of what they look like now, what are a few different providers that are working in the microgrid space, and what are some examples of how this has been used today? Without further ado, so my name's Madeline. I have been with Soligent for almost a year and a half, and I have been working in the solar plus storage space since I began my solar career in 2016. My goal at Soligent is to support customers, meaning installers, homeowners, our account managers, to understand the different energy storage offerings that are in the market right now. And, you know, they're as grid, particularly grid tie battery backup, has really become very popular in the market. There are a ton of choices, and it's hard to know which one is better than another and why might one customer want one system over another. So I hope to kind of debunk any myths you may have about storage and help understand how the systems work and set expectations on the performance of batteries, because batteries are still relatively new and they're here to stay. So microgrids, here we go. So what is a microgrid? If we just look at this diagram, we have a lot of different distributed energy resources. So the phrase DER is maybe something you have seen before. A DER stands for distributed energy resources. So if we just start from the top, we have wind, electric vehicles, a generator, I presume, larger buildings, meaning could be the grid as a whole, smaller residential buildings, solar, and storage. So a microgrid is a localized grid. So it's power that's generated from a site and it's consumed locally on the site. So that's an important feature to distinguish. It's made up of multiple distributed energy resources powering a local grid. And they can disconnect from the traditional grid and operate autonomously in the event of an outage. So the ability to disconnect and still island, the term to when the grid goes down and the microgrid stays up is called islanding, because you create your own personal island of power. And this strengthens the grid by adding a level of resilience to those loads, mitigates grid disturbances, and can be a resource for the grid as a whole for a faster system response and recovery. So they provide another level of resiliency to your grid in general. Also, because a microgrid is producing and storing power locally, you're reducing energy losses from transmission and distribution. So that's another feature that's helpful. Let's keep clicking. So here's our grid overall. And we're related, but we're still separate. So we can feed this grid when the grid requires more power, or we can feed ourselves. And I think those are kind of the two components that microgrids can take advantage of. It's localized resiliency and it's providing grid services, or one or the other or both. So for grid services, you can sell your power back when let's say a demand response is being signaled by a utility. So you can say, okay, I'm going to take some of the resources I have in my microgrid and I'm going to provide those to the grid at large when the cost is advantageous to me. So utilities are finding it advantageous for microgrids to perform in wholesale energy markets, increase their capacity, provide ancillary services, and displace their own utility loads and provide some revenue. So it's utilities have an interest in microgrids, as well as localized businesses or hospitals or different sort of load users or generators. And from a utility perspective, EV charging, as highlighted here, is something that really could be taken advantage of as it connects to a microgrid in general. So how can the microgrid function in energy markets to provide a revenue stream for your resources? Weather forecasting is really helpful. So with a microgrid, if you look at all these distributed energy resources, another defining factor of this system is a microgrid controller. The controller is the brains of the operation, and it can take in information from the kind of loads that are demanding energy needs and the supply from its other resources, and it can kind of adapt to information it's receiving on the weather. So if it indicates that a storm is coming, it can start prioritizing storing power. Maybe it can even shed some loads. So there's a lot of software communication that's going on with the controller that makes these systems so dynamic compared to just kind of a unilateral grid that we've seen in the past. And then other microgrids historically, which we'll talk about a little bit, solar plus storage and wind is not the only kind of microgrid. Really, any grid that's separated from the main grid and can island itself is a microgrid. So combined heat and power is one that we're going to talk about also. So where have microgrids been in the past, and kind of how has that been an element of the grid that we live in today? So 1882, back when electricity was really just starting to kind of be in all of the United States, coal was used to produce both electricity and thermal energy. And this concept is combined heat and power. And you may have seen this in articles or on the internet called CHP, combined heat and power. And the overall system efficiency is boosted when both electricity and steam can be produced from the same fuel. So we're getting a twofer here. Combined heat and power systems kind of became popularized, if you will, in universities. So a lot of universities are using this steam electricity combination to provide resiliency on their campus. So let's use this Cornell example. Each steam generator produces up to 150,000 pounds of steam per hour. So this can heat 150 buildings over 14 million square feet. So we're talking basically the size of the campus. These turbines can satisfy a thermal load in the winter. We would use both. There are two of these turbines. Both would be used in the winter. And then in the summer, one can be used all the time and the other could be cycled for peaking power. So having two turbines gives us some performance flexibility. These generators can island from the grid, which is really a defining feature of a microgrid. And they can service the grid with an export of 5 to 6 megawatts as needed. So that's kind of your twofold use case. You can island when the grid goes down in an emergency, or you can export when the grid is up. So in 2012, October, Hurricane Sandy reached shore in the East Coast and initially caused 8.5 million people in New York City and the Northeast to lose power. Even after a week, 1.3 million people still hadn't regained power. So this was a catastrophic grid activity. What are we going to do after? So Connecticut actually launched a statewide microgrid targeting program for businesses and public services to say, protect yourself from outages. Let's try this microgrid thing out. So with this Connecticut program, there were 13 projects awarded between 2014 and 2017. Out of those 13, 2 actually included solar and energy storage. And when the projects began in 2014, many of them were either generator-based or combined heat and power-based, but both of these solar and energy systems were in 2017. One was a 288 kilowatt, 500 kilowatt, 288 kilowatts of solar with a 500 kilowatt 3-hour battery. So the way that large commercial storage is, the nomenclature is you would talk about the duration of your battery. So in this case, this is a 500 kilowatt 3-hour battery. That would be a 1.5 megawatt hour battery. That's just one way of phrasing it. The second system was an expansion of an existing solar system. So they took the PV that was already there and they added 4 100 kilowatt 225 kilowatt hour battery storage systems. So if we're looking at 100 to 225, that's 2.25 hours, you could phrase it, for those energy storage systems. So 2017 and on, here we come for solar plus storage microgrids. Okay. What can we use? And I actually kind of want to dig back into those two Connecticut 2017 installs and see, just out of curiosity, what that equipment was. I just found the list of those 2 projects from an aggregate, just highlighting all of the projects in general. It didn't really get a lot of detail. So STEM is a software provider that uses their artificial intelligence platform called Athena to control and optimize the performance of energy storage systems. So they don't make batteries or inverters. They make a software that integrates with the batteries and the inverters. STEM systems can be used for front of the meter and behind the meter solutions of 250 kilowatts and above. So right now we're in the larger commercial and utility scale space. So Unicos was a German-based software company in 2005, and they built software to help design and control battery systems, very similar to STEM. However, in 2017, Aggreko, which is a power rental company, purchased Unicos. So now the Aggreko solution, that is Unicos technology, has a hardware and software combination. So they have a physical unit you can buy that is an inverter and a battery. And those storage models come in a 1 megawatt 30-minute and a 1 megawatt 60-minute duration. So that would be 1 megawatt 500 kilowatt hours and 1 megawatt 1 megawatt hour. And these can be scaled into multiple megawatt capacities. HALA is a microgrid controller with economic optimization. So HALA's controller is differentiated because it's a decentralized controller. And what does a decentralized controller mean? So when you're using a distributed control platform, each distributed energy resource has its own distinct controller. So let's say you have a generator controller located at your generator. If that controller is indicating a failure, then all of the other controllers at your other DERs can communicate with each other to balance the system out. So it's resiliency for your microgrid that's already providing resiliency. And last but not least, Agito. Agito is a microgrid energy management system. So again, it's a controller, and it can be optimized for behind the meter applications, which is what we've been experiencing for a lot of these solutions. rural power systems, and fully off-grid projects if those want to emphasize reliability and reducing fuel usage. Reducing fuel usage is a really good example of how a microgrid controller would work for a primarily off-grid use. So the Agito ARC, which is the name of their microgrid controller, can be used with conventional or renewable energy resources. So inverters, energy storage, different battery management systems, because if you have this controller, there's so many moving parts of software for all of these things. So you want to make sure that your controller has the ability to communicate with all of these different types of resources, which is challenging. Agito can also work with a weather station, power meters, and protective relays. So really across the gamut of things you're going to need communication within your microgrid. So let's look at some examples. Here are our solutions. So this stem was installed by Stockman's, and this system is a 464 kilowatt, 1800 kilowatt hour system. So this is a little more than 4 hours. So this is the ratio of power to energy is actually on the higher on the energy side. So this is a longer duration. And this provides backup power. So STEM has a backup power and resiliency application element to their Athena software. So for right now, STEM's hardware providers or partners, I should say, are Tesla's Tesla's Megapack and SunGrow. So SunGrow has a 250 kilowatt and up, and the Tesla Megapack is 1 megawatt and up. So these both can take advantage of backup and resiliency with STEM's control for that element. So we're providing resiliency, but when the grid is up, here's our kind of other side of the coin, performance, we're also reducing demand charges and shifting energy use to off-peak times. So we can have it all. We can have resiliency when the grid goes down, and we can still take advantage of reducing demand charges and shifting energy use. So adding the microgrid controller really enables the battery to do more. It makes the battery more flexible, because batteries themselves are, all they know how to do is charge and discharge when someone tells it to. So it needs someone smart and programmed to determine when to perform. So the Austin Shines system is a really interesting one. So this project was part of the Department of Energy's Sunshot initiative, if you're familiar with that. And the Austin Shines was designed to demonstrate a solution that's adaptable to any region and any market structure, that can provide a credible pathway to a levelized cost of energy, also known as LCOE, of 14 cents per kilowatt hour of solar energy when utilizing storage and other DER management options. So this project, to accomplish this 14 cents per kilowatt hour, was kind of three-pronged. There's a residential component up here, a commercial component over here. I'm not sure if you can see my little cursor. That's all right. It's the top part is residential, the lower right part is commercial, and then the utility element, which is their utility scale. So Austin Energy, which is the local Austin utility provider, has a goal of 10 megawatts of energy storage that is not thermal by 2027. So 6 more years, guys. Got to keep adding some megawatts. So for this utility component specifically, this was a 1.5 megawatt, 3.2 megawatt hour Unitos lithium-ion battery paired with the 2 megawatts of solar in the community. So we have the distributed energy resources of the kind of local residential solar, but then we're adding this 1.5 megawatt, 3.2 megawatt hour battery coupled with that. And interestingly enough, I'm inquiring about this now. So this system was installed a few years ago. We have this 3.2 megawatt hour battery, and then Austin experiences a pretty major energy power outage, did these systems get deployed? Did this keep the lights on these microgrid regions? I don't have the answer, but I'm very curious. All right, HALA. So HALA provides this microgrid integration that provides resiliency application and economic optimization. So for this specific instance, a co-op is putting 25 kilowatts with 64 kilowatt hours on 4 residential homes. So that is the site of the microgrid. Something that's helpful too. So the HALA supports the ability for this housing development to island when they need to, and then resynchronize with the grid. So because of these local control capabilities, the system can continue operating when the grid loses connectivity. So that's really good. The software enables behind the meter economic optimization, which can mean solar over generation recapture, energy arbitrage, and peak shaving. So in this case, something that's really helpful from the HALA controller is that it can prepare for weather events, which is hugely beneficial for a microgrid because you want it to be adaptable when weather events are about to occur. So here are our different use cases. Stockman's with STEM was a water treatment plant. Then Austin Shines was for basically the entire community of Austin, had a lot of different facets. And then here's a co-op utility. So tons of different types of people that want to play in this space. And last but not least, Agido. So this Agido system was actually installed by one of our partners, Solar Alternatives, in New Orleans. So SBP National is a nonprofit disaster relief organization, and they wanted to provide a microgrid and resiliency for their apartment building. So the person is a business and the user is an apartment building. So this system is owned and operated by SBP themselves. Because that's another thing too that's tricky kind of when you're thinking about batteries in general is who's going to own the system and who's going to operate the system. So that's an important part of the puzzle when considering larger storage pieces and who's doing the financing. So it helps that SBP was controlling all of this. So they own the system. They had design, install, and O&M done by Solar Alternatives. And then the Agido is cool in this case because it can do peak shaving and self-consumption in addition to the backup. So it's helpful that your battery is able to provide demand charge, demand watch feature, which kind of tests when you're going to be experiencing a demand charge and adapts accordingly to shave and shaves peaks accordingly, and can still provide backup when an emergency is coming on. So you have the ability to control the Agido to make modifications and alter the parameters based on how you are using the system or how you want the battery to perform. So this system was using a 125 kilowatt Dynapower battery-based inverter with a 440 kilowatt hour Samsung battery. That's for the energy storage element. And then for the grid tie element, there were 3 SMA core ones. So we're also incorporating power meters and a weather station, which all of. So now what? We've learned about all these microgrids. How does this affect me? People who are looking for storage want savings from demand reduction. If someone has an energy bill and 60% of the bill is based on demand charges, they're a really good candidate for demand reduction savings. But in addition to the savings from grid services, they have an expectation of resilience. So if you're spending however many thousands of dollars to have demand shaving, but then when the grid goes down, you lose everything, that's kind of a stinker. So how can we use microgrids are a great way to enable controls for grid services and backup power. That's what I want you to get out of this. So who are good candidates? And I want to really focus my attention on light industrial applications. So grocery stores, hospitals, maybe small manufacturing plants that have power tools that would have really high demands. So look out in your community for people that are needing backup. And particularly I want to focus on the smaller commercial. So let's say 30 to 100 kilowatts. Because small businesses really they rely on savings wherever they can get it, and providing resiliency is really the icing on the cake when they're already experiencing savings from the grid services. All right, that is all.